Hello and welcome to a tutorial and how-to on how to mod Mountain Blade. I'm going to step through a few things. First of all, I'm going to talk about the different kinds of modding. There's basically two kinds of modding. There is morghs, which is a GUI tool developed by a fan of Mountain Blade. So morghs editor, which is this thing here, is a GUI that he's created that allows you to edit the text files or the Python module files directly through a very nice user interface. Now, there is also another method to modding, which is editing the Python module files directly, which does not exactly take programming knowledge, because it's pretty simple. They're basically just declarations. So for example, we have the items Python module file here from Viking Conquest, which Tale Worlds released. So this is, for example, all of the declarations involved in the items. You can see here, for example, the horse basic. Sway-backed, lame, spirited, timid, stubborn, champion. So these are bits that are set in this declaration here for horse basic, which, as we all know if we've played Mountain Blade, are the different types of horse that you can get when you're in the game. Same with, for example, cloth: tattered, ragged, crude, sturdy, and thick. So the bit of cloth has a set here which determines what quality that item is, or rather, what quality that item is capable of having in the game. So for example, if I wanted to make leather also able to have the ragged bit, I could add that right there. And now leather items in the game, after recompiling this and adding the module items to the mod, would be able to spawn with the bit ragged. I can also disable items from spawning with certain mod bits. For example, I could remove this bit right here as such, and then cloth items would not be able to be generated with the ragged quality component on them. So this is basically a declarations file of how my items are created in the game. So if we go down here to the very bottom, we see the items end file, and every item in the game needs to be declared before the items end file. So for example, this is the last item in the game, and this will have the ID of the very last item. Whereas at the top of the file, the first item here, which is a no item. So it is item 0 in the index of items, and it is another placeholder item that is called no item. So that is the structure of that file, and we can see as an example here. Well, let's go away from the tutorial items and look at an actual item in the game. So we can look at this, for example, wild horse. These are this is the ID name of it. This is what it shows up as in the game. This is another string ID. And you can see the different bits that are set here. The abundance in vendors, how much body armor, how many hit points, the difficulty for riding it, the speed, the maneuver, the charge, the scale, which is a bit of a size, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, these are flags on which factions are able to spawn that item in merchants, and so on and so forth. So you can look at a typical item in the game. For example, small hand shields, Pictish only. Here's the ID of it. Here's what it shows up as in game. Here's another string. And then, is it a purchasable item? That's what the merchandise tag has. It's a type shield. It gives a wooden parry effect. It has the effect that is a carried round shield when it is worn. Not exactly sure what that is, but it's up at the top in the item definition to look it up. The weight, the hit points, the body armor, the speed rating, the shield width, and another bit so that the game knows that you can actually use this to block as a shield, and then a selection of what factions can spawn that item. There's only one faction here, as opposed to, for example, the small round shield, which is a very common item that can be spawned by many of the different factions. And the definition of the factions, again, is at the top of the module file. So you can see Norse factions are faction 1, Kingdom 1, 2, 3, and 8. Frisia factions, Kingdom 4, so on and so forth. So you'll have to figure out which factions are in your mod if you're using a mod, or if you want to use native, you have to figure out which factions bind to that. But this, again, is from the Viking Conquest source. So those are the factions that bind to these, if you have played Viking Conquest. So that is one way to mod, for example, the items in the game. And the rest of the data in the game, the troops, the troop trees, the map layout, everything in the game is based on this module system, which is written in Python. There's no logic to it. They're just straight up declarations in these Python files. Once you edit one of these Python files, you would then go to the folder that it's in. For example, this file right here is this file right here called module items.py. You would then rebuild the entire module so that it would rebuild all files and create a folder with all of the files needed to run that mod. Even the vanilla game is considered a mod. It has a folder full of specific files that are dedicated to the game. So in your Mountain Blade Warband folder, you will have a modules folder and you will have a native folder here. That is the native mod. It's not technically a mod because it's not a modification of the base game. It is the base game, but it still is regarded as a module for the purposes of Mountain Blade. So basically all of the files that tell the game what to load, how the game world is supposed to work, what troops, what items, and all these things exist. And that is one of the reasons why Mountain Blade is very moddable. It's very easy to mod because even the base vanilla game is packaged into all of these definitions, which can be very easily manipulated. And when you create this new mod and it gives you all the files, it would create all of these new files here. So for example, the items file that it would create from the module items Python file is this file right here. Now obviously this is a lot harder to edit by hand. That is why it is much easier to manage it, editing your items and adding them and so on and so forth through this method. This is the items file that is produced. As you can see, it goes all the way down and it defines the bits associated with each item. So that is the end result of any method of modding, whether you do the Python method or whether you use morghs editor and edit the text files directly. This is the end result. So what we're going to go now to is morghs item editor. When you load up morghs item editor, first you're going to want to click on change module settings. Now, whether you want to edit the module system or the text files is up to you. If you do have the module system, I would recommend editing the module system. If you don't have the module system, which is going to be the case in most of the mods that you download, when you download a mod, it's going to be compiled text files. So you're not going to have that module system. If you end up somehow being able to obtain the module system for a mod, I would highly recommend editing the module system because then you can even manage it in text editor quite easily as well and make edits and things like that in case this GUI is not fully functional. But for this example, we're going to go ahead and edit the text files because I've already shown you how to, by hand, edit the module system. So for example, you take a mod here, you go to your install folder for Mountain Blade. You go to the modules directory. It is looking for the path to this module that you want to edit. we are going to go ahead and edit native. So you would just go click on modules native. Now save configuration. It says configuration is saved. Now you can edit the different things in the game here. Troop editor, parties editor, party templates editor, factions editor, and item editor. So these all relate to the different kinds of things that you want to edit. Now we're going to go, for case of this tutorial, and edit some items. So you can see here, one of the first things to consider when you are looking at editing items is that the mod that you are editing might have a limit to the number of items that it can import when it is loading the game. Certain mods have been able to edit certain things and increase the limit of items. They do that via certain tweaks and hacks, which in turn also reduces a little bit of the performance of the game engine. So the base game engine, I believe, had a limit of something like 900 items. With Warband's patches, that increased to, I think, 1,215 items. And then certain mods have been able to create some tweaks and hacks and whatnot that have been able to increase their item limit at the expense, of course, of performance. So ideally, you would still want to stay within the core game executables quasi hard-coded item limit of, I think it's 1,215. You can look that number up via Google. Just search for item limit in Mountain Blade Warband and make sure you're looking for the current version of Warband. So that's nowhere near 619, so we have plenty of space to add items if we want to go ahead and add items to this, or we can just edit existing items. Now, the thing about adding items is that we also have to add them to, for example, the factions that are going to sell them via merchants, and we might want to add them to troops, which means we would have to go back to the other window in Morghs editor, the main menu, and edit troops so that we are adding these new items that we are creating to troops that we want to use those items. But however, for this tutorial example, I'm just going to add a few items and using base templates as those items. So let's just take a random item, for example, an Ashwood Pike right here. Let's say we want to take this. What I'm going to do with this is add item, and it is when I click an item here and then I click add item, and also this menu these menu buttons right here will allow you to do that add and delete. It says the form will be filled with data from item 487. Do you want to continue? Yes. Now, one thing to notice is that this item is going to be added at the very end of the list before the end item placeholder item. So instead of item's end item being number 619, this is going to take its place. And that is why you can see here, add item 619. So we'll just go ahead and add that item 619, which means that is now item 619, and it bumps up the end item placeholder into slot 620, which means that we have a total of 620 items in our items list when we load this game up. However, this item we haven't edited. It is basically the exact same item as the pike that we just copied. However, it has its own item ID and in-game identifiers. So we're going to give this a new identifier. We're going to give it item weapon pike. So we're going to call it Super Pike. Any space will automatically be replaced with an underscore. And then we're going to call plurals of these as super pikes. You can't ever have plurals of an unstackable item, so that would never take place. So you can put the flags for this type of item here. So for example, this is type polearm. Maybe we also want to make it, or make it instead a two-handed weapon, or want to make it instead a one-handed weapon, turn it into a horse, things like that. Any of the flags here will affect these modifiers and what is capable of being edited here. Well, we're going to keep it as a type polearm. Other flags are merchandise. That means whether it can be bought or sold. if it has a wooden parry, this would be ticked. If this is not ticked, it basically does not have a wooden parry, which in most cases means that it has a metallic parry. And that, I think, really only deals with the sound that it makes when you parry with it. So is it two-handed or not? Can it be reloaded on horseback? That doesn't matter for a weapon that's not reloaded. Is it a primary or a secondary weapon? You can put those flags there. Does it have bonus against shield? Does it have a penalty with shield? Can it be used on horseback? Things like this. Crush through is a nice flag. That means that it has extra damage through a shield. So even if somebody blocks, then they still can take damage from it. Another very nice flag is extra penetration. So that means that it has armor penetration. So even somebody who is highly armored takes extra damage with the penetration effect. Then there are capabilities here. So the type of attack is dealt with here. Is it a thrust one-handed ability? Typically like a dagger or sword in the game will have a one-handed thrust. Can you do an overswing? Can you do a right slash? Can you do a left slash? And these are all one-handed abilities, keep in mind. Or do you have those same type of attacks through the two-handed method? With this specific weapon, there is a polearm thrust and an overswing polearm. Do we want to add a left and right slash for the polearm as well? We can add that there. If we want to make a polearm that is only thrustable, for example, that would mean that we only leave that one there. If we want to make a polearm that can have all of these different attacks, we'd have to enable all of those. The different kinds of shooting, the different kinds of attacks enabled on horseback, the kind of carry that it looks like on the character, where it is basically carried on the character model, and so on and so forth, and the ability for it to parry. So for example, if you only wanted it to be able to parry forward, you would leave that one checked, which would probably be pretty bad because then you wouldn't be able to parry these other kinds of attacks. There are certain weapons that have the 464-bit enabled. If it has it enabled, then leave it enabled. If it doesn't, leave it off. That deals mostly with the model assets, as far as I know. Then you have modifiers. Do you want this weapon to be able to be spawned as cracked? Yes, no, turn it off. If you don't want it to be spawned as bent, turn that off. If you want it to be spawned as, for example, Masterwork, which is the best mod for weapons in the game, click that. Balanced is also a very good mod. So then you have all the actual values. What is it going to cost? Let's say 2,000. What is it going to weigh? Heavier weapons are harder to manage and they add weight to your character. So let's make it a lot lighter weight. Abundance is a scale of 0 to 100, and that is the amount of that item in sort of a percentage ratio, chance ratio, that will show up in merchants. So let's leave that at 100. What's the difficulty? So with this specific item, we're talking about strength because it's a melee weapon, and melee weapons have a difficulty rating in strength. So let's say we want to have it as a 15 difficulty. The thing about difficulty, which is especially important with ranged weapons like bows, is that the skill in power draw will be multiplied by the difficulty. So if for a bow, the difficulty rating is actually the skill in power draw. If you have a power draw of 5 and a difficulty of 5, then it will multiply damage by the difficulty rating. So that is a very good thing to have actually a higher difficulty level on things like bows, because it will add damage to it. However, the drawback is that you need to have a higher skill level to use that item. But later in the game, when you have that higher skill level, it actually makes it even more damaging. The hit points is an aspect of how durable that piece is. This is mostly relevant on shields. You'll notice that shields can be broken, and the hit points on the shields is much more relevant to set in this kind of regard. There's certain weapons that can also be broken. Typically in native and most of the mods out there, weapons are not able to be broken. So hit points are relatively high, and there are other flags that need to be set for it to be able to be broken anyway. Speed is the speed of the weapon, as we all know. Let's make that a really fast weapon. Weapon length, that's the length of the weapon, the reach that it has. Let's make that a really long reach as well. It's a super pike after all. Could even make it 300, which is an incredibly long weapon. I don't think anything in native has anything close to that. And then you have down here the actual damage types. You can choose which damage type you want to have here. For example, let's say the swing damage is cut, and we want to make it 50 cut swing damage. Thrust damage we set as pierce, and we want to make it, let's say, 60 thrust pierce damage. Then at the very last we have the faction IDs. So these are the factions that are allowed to spawn this weapon. And for sake of this, I'm going to make the player supporters faction and the player faction, and then just add all of these kingdom factions. So what that will do is add this item, because it is also flagged as merchandise right here, it will add that item to the merchants in all of these kingdoms in the base game. Now, different mods will deal with these identifiers differently, so you're going to have to just really pay attention and try to figure out. You can also, for example, add it to the culture lists in the native game. The culture lists and the kingdom lists are basically, the difference between them is that these are the actual kingdoms. So for example, if you go to the city of Praven and you go to the weaponsmith, whoever owns Praven at that point, for let's say the Vagers took over Praven, their faction kingdom identifier will be the merchant for that. Whereas culture influences that any Swadian culture cities are able to have that. But the most proper way to bind the item to the merchants is through the kingdom modifiers, which you can see in these definitions down here. You can see in the module system here that it is binding to the kingdom modifiers in the module system. So we go into game, and one thing that you can do in game is hit Ctrl tilde, the button left of the 1 on your keyboard, and type in cheat menu. Hit enter. When you go to camp, you can then go and find this little menu here called cheat menu. Now keep in mind, not every mod will have this enabled. It is enabled in native, so if a mod does not have it enabled, that means they specifically took it out. You can then use this find item menu item right here. I've already moved it. You can move to the next item range with this button here. I've already moved it to the end, so I can choose from this range. That means I get all the items listed here in that range. So this is numbering the items all the way up until this slot right here, which is actually the placeholder for the last end item in the game. So you can, basically buy those items. Some of them will be free. Some of them will, if there's a cost associated with an item, they will have their normal cost. For example, if I take that, it has a price of 480. I don't actually have that much money. Use a little, I don't have cheats enabled, so I can't do that. So that is where you can actually look for items in the game, in whatever mod that you're using, and try to look at their identifier. So when you're looking at that find, you can see the range of items. You know that the first item is 556, the last item is 601. So when you go and you look at those items, you know that this item right here is number 576 it was, and you know that this item here is item 601. So that will help you count basically where the item might be in the item list, and look at the items that you want to be able to edit or add templates from and things like that. So that's how that works. That's how a module system works. This is how a morg system works. Now when you edit an item, you want to always click this update item, and you'll see here that item weapon pike has been updated, and that is the item entry that it is created in the item text file. So you can go back to the folder here, and you see a native item kinds. You scroll down to the bottom, and we now don't have that in here yet. Ah, that's right. We've updated the item here, but we haven't clicked save. So you click save. Do you want to create a timestamp backup of your item kinds before saving? Yes. So it will actually create a timestamp backup file of that. And then this primary item kinds text file will be updated with your new items. You can add as many items as you want between saves. Just make sure that when you edit an item, you click this update button between edit. For example, if I change the difficulty here to 10, and then I click this item here, and I go back, well, it changed back to its 15 saved value because I forgot to click update item after editing that item and moving away from it. So that's how this works. Updating items will update it in your current session. In order to save that to file, you have to click the save button here. Now you can go back to menu here from the file menu. You have unsaved data. Do you really want to close? That's because I edited without saving, but yes, that's fine. Now, for example, if I wanted to do troops and add my new item to a troop, let's say we've got Vager Spearmen here. That's a multiplayer troop. So let's go back up to the normal single player troops. We'll just find Rodok Sergeant. Yeah, let's just take the Rodok Sergeant here. Or the Rodok Trained Spearman, that makes more sense. So in here you can see all of the values of that troop. This is also the highest tier troop of that troop tree line, as you can see, because, oh, sorry, no, it's not. You can see here that it does have an upgrade path. So you can also see the number of the upgrade. So the upgrade path from this unit goes to 89, which means that it goes to this one. This one goes to 90, so it goes to Sergeant. And here's the Sergeant, which has no upgrade path, meaning that it is the highest tier of that upgrade troop tree specifically, whatever branch that troop upgraded by. And these are the stats of that highest upgraded troop. It's a level 25. Here's its stats, weapon skills, and character skills and whatnot. You can also see here the items that this troop is equipped with, and the available items to equip the troop with. So for example, this troop has that weapon, that weapon, that weapon, that's a shield. These are different kinds of armor. So I've removed, it had 3 different kinds of weapons that are available to spawn on that unit. And you can see that it has multiple types of different pieces of armor. So the reason you do this is so that all your troops have a little bit of variation, so that every Rodok Sergeant is not exactly the same. They have a sort of a pool of equipment that they can pull from. You see that they can get leather gloves or mail gloves. They could get this bassinet with nose guard, or this bassinet with aventail, or even this full helm here for their helmet. They have a few different kinds of armors that they can choose from. But just to ensure that our Rodok Sergeant gets the super pike that we just created, we removed all of his weapons and then we added this weapon super pike. If we were to add the super pike and leave the other weapons there, they would then all still be viable options for that troop to spawn with in game. And it's up to you how you want to do that. You can leave that as it is, or if you want to make specific troops that are specific to what you want them to be, then you can specifically just say, I want them to have this, this, and this item and nothing else. And then they are guaranteed to spawn with those items. Other things that you want to look at here is the guarantee section right here. Do you want to guarantee that they have armor or not? If you don't guarantee that they have armor, then it's sort of a rolling of the dice when that unit spawns, whether they have a piece in their armor slot or not. Do you want them to guarantee having a horse or not? If they are a mounted troop, well, you should probably guarantee that they have a horse, but then you also have to go and find a horse in the item list here and add it to their available items, of course. Otherwise, this won't do anything. It could even bug out for you. So make sure that you actually have the items that you are guaranteeing. And that's pretty much it for your troops. You can also edit the upgrade paths, and the same thing as in the items. You have to edit the troop ID if you're creating new troops. The ID has to be unique between troops or items or any declaration in the game. So you may have to make sure that you're making a different troop ID if you make a new troop. And then this is just what it shows up as in the game. You could name every troop in the game as Roadhog Sergeant. It does not have to be unique. It's just what shows up in the game. And then of course you have to choose the faction that this troop shows up as. And that's pretty much how you do troop editing. And you would be able to add an item to your troops. So this tool I will be putting online just to make sure there's an extra backup of it. You can typically find this tool available for download at a few places, but it is, I have seen that some of the links are dying. So I'm going to link some mod resources in the description below. And I'm also going to make sure that this is uploaded and give you a download link of this specific tool so that you have this to use. So we've gone over finding items to edit, adding items, talking about limitations. You have to check the limitations of how many items are available in the mod that you're editing. One thing to think about when you are adding new items, if you're trying to edit a mod, I would really recommend, especially if the list of items is over, say, 1,000, just try adding 10 items. If you do that maybe 5-10 times and you save it and you load your game and it loads all right, well, first you have to make sure that the IDs are different. So don't do that right away. Make sure the IDs are indeed different, like so. Sorry about that. 3. Now you can save it. Now you have unique item IDs. If it loads the game without crashing, you know that you then have a few slots available without the game crashing to be able to add some extra items that you want. That is a much easier and faster way to check if that mod will support additional items in it, rather than going through the work of, using this editor, creating your perfect items, loading up the game, and then it crashes and you didn't even realize that it wasn't going to support more items. That's just going to be a huge waste of time for you. So make sure that your game can support more items by doing a little simple check like that. If it doesn't, you can go and maybe take an item that is like the practice javelins or even the tutorial weapons and edit them to make your super weapons for you and your companions that you want to have. Tutorial ones typically work very well because those are the set of weapons that are used only in the tutorial, which are not used in the real game. So as you can see, they are not flagged as merchandise, and I don't believe they probably have any faction. Yeah, they're not tagged to any faction either. So these are good bases of items to use if you want to set up your own super items, and you can edit them however you want. Another thing about weapons and items and so on and so forth, however, if you want to, say, change a battle axe into a different kind of weapon like a sword, you're going to want to change the mesh of it, and you'll have to look up what the other mesh is. So you might want to look at, for example, a sword, get the name of the mesh for that one, and then use that mesh. So you can maybe look at the nicest sword in the game that you really like and use that mesh file. So for example, male coat has nobleman OUTF as the mesh. And if you were looking for like an Arabian sword, you might want to use that mesh if you wanted it, your weapon to look like that weapon is in game. So that's how you can make the weapons look the way you want them. You can also filter search here. So for example, the strange samurai set of items in the game have these meshes. Wakizashi, the big great sword, is a nodachi. That's a katana, samurai helmet, samurai boots, and samurai armor. So you could edit these. These don't actually show up in the game in any place. They are just sort of Easter egg items. And as you can see, they are not flagged as merchandise, and they're not tagged to any faction or kingdom. So that is basically item editing in a nutshell. If you have any comments, questions, please put it down in the comments below. And if you have any suggestions on additional content, feel free to send it my way. I'm trying to make some additional content on my channel. If you liked this content, if it was helpful to you, please subscribe, please throw a like. It helps a lot. And see you next time. Have a great day. So back in game, we go into town. I've reloaded the game, made it a new game to regenerate what's on the vendors. And there we go, Superbike. If you're looking for great mods to play in this game, which is one of the best moddable games in history, there are 4 different sites that I would recommend in no particular order. All the sites are really good. ModDB is an old great mod site. They have quite a few good mods. You can see 622 mods here. If you like using that site. Another good resource is the Steam Workshop. Lots of mods here. Another great resource is, of course, Nexus Mods. Lots of mods here, currently 1089. This one seems to be a little bit more updated. Depends on the mod, of course. And then lastly, but definitely not least, is the Teo Worlds forum. I'll put these links all in the description. The thing to note is that you'll really have to check all sites because certain mods are only updated on a specific page. Pretty much 99.9% of all mods are updated on one of these sites. It's really up to the mod developer on which one they choose to use and which one they choose to continue updating their mod on. Some developers even have their own website, but you can usually find out where that is by going and finding their post either in the forums or one of these other sites for that mod, linking you to that. So that is usually how you end up getting the latest updates to that mod. Hey there, thank you for watching. I hope you like my content. You can join me playing these games and mods live on DLive, Mixer, and Twitch. Go follow the links in the description below, and I'll see you there.